I grew up in Windmere Cove, a small town in Maine where fog rolled in from the Atlantic like it had nowhere else to go. Our house was perched above the cliffs, cedar-sided and imposing, with windows that caught every gray morning and orange sunset. I should have felt safe there, and my parents were kind, educated, gentle, but I never did. Not entirely. My sister Lucy cast a shadow over every corner of my childhood. People called her angelic. I called her a quiet storm. Even at 5, she had this way of getting what she wanted just by staring. It wasn't cute or precocious. It was deliberate, like she'd studied me for weaknesses and memorized them. I learned early on that resistance was dangerous. If I hesitated, she would linger until I surrendered. And she did it with a calmness that made our parents smile and misunderstand. I remember the first time I realized she could be cruel. I was 7, sitting on the porch steps drawing in my notebook, when I saw her crush a moth in her hand. I yelled at her, and she just looked at me with blank eyes, lips tight, and walked inside as if I were the misbehaving one. I never mentioned it to Mom or Dad. They wouldn't have seen it. School wasn't much better. Lucy would shadow me in the hallways, never speaking, just watching. One day, a boy in her class fell from the retaining wall at recess. I was across the room when I saw it happen. It wasn't an accident in the way anyone said. She didn't even flinch. I did. I found my refuge beneath the cliffs, in a hidden sea cave only exposed at low tide. Inside, I arranged driftwood, coins, feathers, even tiny pocket watches. I called it my kingdom. It was a place where she couldn't follow me, couldn't control me, couldn't watch. At least I thought she couldn't. But she always knew. It was mid-November, leaves brittle under our boots, the wind carrying salt and decay. Mom and Dad had insisted on a family walk, and I kept a cautious distance, letting Lucy wander ahead. She turned back occasionally, glancing at me, and I felt her eyes like they were mapping my fear. I thought I could hide her from my little kingdom, but when I slipped away to the caves, she appeared silently, as if she had been waiting. "I want to see where you disappear to," she said. Not a question. I swallowed, fear in my throat, and led her down. The cave smelled of wet stone and driftwood, the walls slick beneath my hands. She moved confidently, like the world had always belonged to her. And deep in the recesses, I realized she wanted more than curiosity. She wanted power over me, over everything I had ever held secret. She carried the metal detector as if it were a weapon, dragging it along the jagged rocks, each step deliberate. "I heard a story about buried treasure," she said. I froze. No one had told her anything. No story existed. She wasn't pretending to be curious. She was testing me. "You shouldn't be here," I said, voice low. "You don't know the tides. You don't know the rocks." She tilted her head, those pale eyes catching the faint light from the cave mouth. "I know you, Elias," she said simply. "I know everything." The deeper we went, the colder it got. Algae coated the stones and water dripped steadily from the ceiling. My chest tightened. I thought of the stories I'd built in my head about my sanctuary, of kings and treasures. None of it mattered now. She wasn't here for games. She found the brooch first, half buried under seaweed, polished and glinting in the dim light. She held it up, eyes narrowing. "You hid something," she said, voice hard, calculating. "I didn't—" "Shh," she interrupted, stepping closer. "Don't lie, I can tell." I reached for her, but the ceiling shifted above her. A crack ran along the limestone, dust falling. She glanced up, smirked faintly, almost like she was daring me. And then the rock gave way. I didn't move fast enough. Stones slammed down onto her legs, her ribs, her arms. I screamed her name, the sound bouncing off the walls. She didn't cry for help, didn't even gasp. She only stared at me. Cold, judgmental, hateful. As if she expected me to stop the inevitable. I froze, my mind running in circles, too terrified to act. My sanctuary was no longer safe. And in that moment I realized she had been waiting for this, watching me, waiting for me to fail her. Hours later, when rescuers finally found her, she was gone from the shadows of my kingdom, and the tide had carried away any sense of control I thought I had. They said it was a tragic accident. The town mourned her, praised her, angelic. I remembered the wings of moths and the drowned rabbit. I remembered everything they didn't see, and I swore, silently, that I would never speak of any of it. Years passed, but the feeling never left me, that quiet dread, that sense of being watched even when I was alone. Mom and Dad never pressured me to talk about it, and I never tried. The cliffs remained my refuge, but my kingdom felt hollow without her to oppose, without the fear she instilled in me. I went to college, studied history, and kept mostly to myself. I learned to speak, to laugh, to blend in. But every time the wind carried salt from the ocean, every time I caught the reflection of a shadow behind me, I remembered. Then one day, when I was 21, I got the letter. Mom's handwriting, looping and familiar, elegant in its simplicity. Inside, she confessed what I had feared. The brooch, the story, the temptation. She had placed it there. She had known what Lucy was, had recognized it in time to stop it from growing unchecked. She hadn't saved me from Lucy. She had saved the world from her. It was relief and horror intertwined, a feeling that made my chest ache. I had survived by luck and instinct, by the foresight of someone who understood that evil doesn't disappear. It sharpens, it waits. Even now I think about the sea cave, about the cold limestone and wet seaweed, about Lucy's eyes, unblinking, and that smirk she gave me as the stones fell. I tell myself that it was nature and timing, that chance saved me. But deep down I know better. Some things are too sharp to survive in the open. The older I got, the more I noticed patterns, shadows in the corner of rooms, sounds in the night, faces that reminded me of her, people who seemed too curious, too clever. It was as if the world carried pieces of her everywhere, waiting for the weak. I became careful, meticulous. I studied people's behavior the way she once studied me. I watched for weakness, learned to spot it before it could harm me. The instinct she taught me in those early years became my shield. I rarely return to Windmere Cove. I don't need to. Memories are vivid enough to haunt me. I keep a photo of the cliffs on my desk, a reminder that life is fragile and that some evil, if nurtured, could take everything. Sometimes I imagine her in the fog, pacing the cliffs as she once did, scanning the world for what she could control. But I also imagine Mom's hands, planting that brooch, setting the trap. A quiet heroism in her awareness, a moral clarity that I could only now appreciate. I survived because of someone else's foresight, because someone recognized the danger that I, as a child, could barely understand. It's both comforting and terrifying. Now, when I walk along the coastline, I remember every detail: the smell of wet cedar, the salt in the air, the hidden sea cave where my childhood and fear lived. I think of Lucy, and I think of Mom, and I think of what happens when darkness is ignored. Life has taught me vigilance, restraint, and the value of quiet observation. I've learned to listen to instincts I once ignored, and I've learned that not all evil announces itself with shouts or violence. Some evil is silent, patient, and infinitely dangerous. The cliffs remain a memory and a warning. The sea, relentless and indifferent, reminds me of choices and consequences. I carry the lessons of my youth everywhere, that awareness can save lives, that human nature contains shadows we sometimes fail to see, and that the line between protection and destruction is thinner than we realize. Evil often hides behind ordinary faces, and true danger may lie in the quietest places. Awareness, vigilance, and discernment can protect not only oneself but others from harm. Sometimes what appears to be a protective action is also a choice to prevent darkness from spreading, and that foresight, courage, and moral clarity can save lives where strength alone cannot. Before I tell you what happened that November night in Ridgeton, Vermont, you need to understand who I was before everything changed. I grew up in foster care after my father disappeared when I was 9. One day he kissed my forehead before heading to his shift at the lumber mill, and then he just never came back. My mother unraveled completely after that, and I spent the next 8 years bouncing between homes. By the time I aged out of the system at 18, I had learned that the only person I could rely on was myself. I worked whatever jobs I could find, eventually landing as a prep cook at a small family restaurant called the Copper Kettle in Ridgeton. The owner, Mr. Harrigan, was kind and didn't ask too many questions about your past. For someone like me, that was more than enough. The job was repetitive but soothing. I chopped vegetables, prepped sauces, assembled plates during dinner rush. There was something comforting about the routine. In the kitchen, everything had a place and a purpose. I controlled the knife, the heat, the outcome. For someone who had spent most of her life feeling powerless, that mattered more than anyone could understand. The restaurant sat wedged between a laundromat and a hardware store. The alley behind it was narrow, lined on one side by our brick wall and on the other by a chain-link fence separating us from an overgrown lot and dense Vermont forest beyond. During the day, the alley was unremarkable, but at night, especially in late autumn, it transformed into something else entirely. The single security light above our back door barely reached the dumpster, leaving most of the alley in shadow. The restaurant had a policy requiring 2 people to take trash out together after dark. But like most rules in understaffed restaurants, it got bent regularly. When you're exhausted after a long rush and everyone wants to go home, waiting for someone else feels unnecessary. I had taken trash out alone dozens of times before without incident. That November night started like any other closing shift. By 9:30, most of the staff had clocked out. The dishwasher, Carlos, was finishing up, and Emma, the manager, was doing deposits in the office. I looked at the trash bags by the back door and made a decision I'd made many times before. I would just take them out myself. It would take 30 seconds. Nothing bad had ever happened before. I pushed open the back door, letting the cold air hit my face. My breath came out in visible puffs as I hefted the bags toward the dumpster. The wind was picking up, making bare branches rattle and sending dead leaves skittering across the asphalt. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Not the wind, not an animal, but human breathing, wet and rhythmic and far too close. I froze, every muscle suddenly tense. I should have turned around right then, but curiosity made me pull out my phone and turn on the flashlight. The beam cut through darkness, catching movement behind the dumpster. Someone was there, kneeling, hunched over something dark. As my eyes adjusted, the details emerged with horrible clarity. It was a man in a dark hooded sweatshirt. His shoulders moved in slow, rhythmic motions. His hands were dark and wet. Beneath him was a deer, small, with its side torn open. I could see pale ribs glistening in the harsh light. Then I saw his face dip down toward the wound, saw his jaw working, heard the wet sound of chewing. He was eating it, raw flesh directly from the carcass. My mind went blank with shock. This couldn't be real. But the smell that reached me confirmed it all. Copper and rot and something feral that made every primitive part of my brain scream. He lifted his head slowly and turned toward me. I couldn't see his face clearly beneath the hood, but I could see his eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. Then he spoke, and his voice was calm, almost conversational. "You shouldn't sneak up on people," he said, each word measured. "Pretty girls get hurt doing that." There was no threat in his tone, no anger, but somehow that made it worse. He wasn't warning me. He was stating a fact. And beneath the calm surface, I heard interest. Not in the deer, but in me. My body moved before my mind caught up. The trash bags fell. I stumbled backward and ran. The back door seemed impossibly far away. My hands shook so violently, I almost couldn't grab the handle. But it opened, and I fell through into the fluorescent safety of the kitchen. I didn't scream. My throat had closed completely. I just stood at the sink, shaking. Carlos looked up, concern on his weathered face. My boyfriend Marcus had been waiting in the parking lot, and when I didn't come out, he came inside. He found me frozen, tears streaming down my face. "Tessa, what happened?" he asked, his hands on my shoulders. "There's someone in the alley," I whispered. He was eating. There was a deer. He spoke to me. Marcus grabbed a knife and went outside despite my protests. He returned 2 minutes later, pale. "There's nothing out there. No one behind the dumpster. No deer. Nothing." I stared at him, unable to process. That's impossible. He was right there. Emma called the police. 2 young officers arrived and took my statement with professional courtesy, but I could see the skepticism. They searched the alley and found nothing. No blood, no fur, no drag marks. Nothing to prove what I described had happened. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him kneeling there, heard his voice telling me pretty girls get hurt. What did that mean? Was he threatening me or stating a pattern I had nearly become part of? Mr. Harrigan took it seriously. Security cameras were installed. New floodlights went up. The 2-person trash rule became non-negotiable. But none of it answered the real question that haunted me. Why had he been there? Why that night? Why our restaurant? What if he had been waiting specifically for someone to come out alone? I tried to go back to work for 3 months, but every time I walked past that back door, my throat tightened and my heart raced. The kitchen that had once felt like sanctuary began to feel like a trap. In February, I quit, telling Mr. Harrigan I'd found a better opportunity. It was a lie. The truth was I couldn't work there anymore. I moved to Burlington, taking a job where the trash went down a chute to a basement compactor. No alleys, no dark corners. Marcus and I broke up not long after. He had never fully believed me, and I could see the doubt in his eyes every time I insisted on checking locks 3 times. Now it's been almost 4 years, and I still think about that night every day. I don't take shortcuts through alleys anymore. I park in well-lit areas and check my back seat. I don't go outside after dark if I can avoid it. People tell me I'm being paranoid, that I should see a therapist. Maybe they're right. But trauma isn't about being irrational. It's your body remembering what your mind wishes it could forget. The worst part isn't the fear. The worst part is the knowing. Knowing that there are people who exist outside normal boundaries of human behavior. People who crouch behind dumpsters in the dark. People who speak calmly when caught. Who look at you with interest instead of shame. And once you know that, really know it in your bones, you can never unknow it. I don't know who he was or where he went. I don't know if he had been watching the restaurant or if my appearance was coincidence. I don't know if he would have hurt me if I hadn't run. And that not knowing is its own kind of torture. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If your body tells you to run, run. Don't wait for permission or evidence. Your safety is more important than anyone else's comfort. Don't let exhaustion or convenience override caution, because danger only has to find you once. I was lucky. I ran fast enough and the door opened. But luck isn't a strategy. Be smart, be careful, be vigilant, and never assume you're safe just because you can't see the danger waiting in the dark. Safety protocols exist for a reason, and convenience is never worth risking your life. Always trust your instincts when something feels wrong, because your survival depends on listening to that inner voice of caution. No job, no routine, and no sense of familiarity can protect you from danger if you ignore the warning signs your body and mind are giving you. I never thought of myself as an anxious person. At least I didn't before the Maple Crest afternoon. I remember the cold snap hitting Kingston in late October 2020. Marina and I had moved to the town 6 months earlier, trying to trade in our city burnout for quiet mornings and the slow rhythm of small-town life. The reds and oranges of the maples promised the kind of peace you see in calendars or postcards, but I hadn't realized peace could carry the weight of unease until that day. Marina was photographing the pond's edge, crouched behind a cluster of reeds, camera in hand, Whispering softly to the teals, she followed with her lens. "Look at the light on that wing, Caleb," she murmured, smiling. I kept my eyes on the water, the shifting reflections, my coffee cup warming my palms. That's when I saw him, or at least noticed him. A man in a faded red hoodie, the fabric thin and worn, walking slowly but deliberately toward us. He asked if we'd seen a lost golden retriever. His tone was flat, almost clinical. "No worry, no urgency, just a question." I thought maybe he was eccentric, perhaps someone lonely looking for a dog that didn't exist. But then I noticed the way his gaze lingered. Not on the pond, not on the trees, not on where a dog might be, but on us. He scanned the cooler, our hands, the straps of Marina's camera bag, the blanket where we'd left our lunch. I frowned, nudging Marina. "He doesn't seem worried about a dog." She didn't answer. She had already sensed it, the subtle shift in the air. That late autumn stillness makes sound travel differently, and in that suspended moment, every footstep of his seemed deliberate, a measurement. He passed by once, twice. On the third pass, he moved diagonally, subtly closing the circle. My stomach dropped. The families nearby began packing their things. What had been a public park felt like a stage with only 3 actors: him, us, and the void around us. "Let's move closer to the path," I whispered. "Closer to the lights, near people. Don't panic, just walk." We packed slowly, carefully, each of us pretending the movement was casual. We were always careful, or at least tried to be. I kept glancing at the tree line, tracking his progress. He disappeared from view, and for a moment I exhaled. Then Marina's voice cut through my relief. "He's not walking. He's standing, behind that sycamore." I froze. Her finger pointed subtly. Half concealed, he had made himself visible but deniable, watching us as if we were specimens. We left that spot quickly, but not running. The kind of deliberate movement that simulates calm while adrenaline climbs your spine like ice. At the car, Marina reached for her phone to call the ranger. It wasn't in her bag. I could see the panic in her chest, her breath quickening. Then I spotted it on the dashboard, face up, camera open. A photo of us, taken from behind, high angle, as if he had been standing over the blanket without a sound. I hadn't heard him approach, I hadn't seen him move. And just like that, our ordinary Sunday in the park had tipped into a quiet nightmare. That night I barely slept. I kept picturing him, hoodie drawn up, his expression neutral, the way he circled without urgency but with purpose. Marina refused to talk much, staring at her camera like it held some secret we weren't ready to face. The next morning, I froze at the front door. Folded neatly on the walkway lay the red hoodie, creased, deliberate, like a gift we were expected to notice. My eyes darted around, checking if Marina had followed me outside. Nothing. When I blinked, it vanished. No wind had moved it, no birds, no footprints, just gone. Marina suggested we ignore it. "It's probably a prank," she said, voice tight but trying to stay rational. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The way he had watched us, the camera's intrusion, it was methodical, rehearsed, like he had mapped our behaviors days in advance. I went to work that day with my hands shaking inside my coat pockets. Every passerby, every jogger, even the mailman felt like a potential shadow, like someone observing from a distance. Marina stayed home. She avoided the windows. She didn't even want to check the bushes. She said she felt like we'd been cataloged, like we were specimens in a gallery we couldn't enter. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to Maple Crest, circling the paths, scanning the pond edges, counting joggers and dog walkers. Nothing. But the thought remained, chilling. He could have been anywhere. Any moment could become a photograph, a record. Weeks passed. We didn't return to the park. The reds and golds of autumn lost their comfort. Marina deleted her bird photos from that day. "I can't have them," she said quietly. "Not if he's taken more." I understood. The real terror wasn't that we'd been watched. It was that we didn't know what else might exist out there. Images, memories, exposures we hadn't consented to. We began checking locks obsessively. Phones, laptops, cameras, doors, even the mailbox. I installed extra lights and cameras around the house. Every time the wind rustled through the bare trees, every time leaves skittered across the driveway, we jumped. Our calm life had become a series of micro-survivals, each one reminding us of the invisible presence in the park. Marina whispered once while staring out at the street, "Do you think he's still there?" I didn't answer. How could I? He could be anywhere. And that's the worst part, the not knowing. I started noticing patterns I hadn't before. At work, I'd sense a shadow in the hallway. When Marina went grocery shopping, I imagined him in the parking lot, hooded and patient. Each sound in the apartment, a creak, a knock, even the neighbor's dog barking, set my heart racing. We stopped leaving doors unlocked even briefly. I refused to answer the phone from unknown numbers. Marina became hyper-aware of people's gazes, subtle motions, tiny gestures. It was exhausting, but necessary. Our routines had to change. Our safety depended on anticipation. One evening, Marina brought up the photo again. "Do you think he has more?" I swallowed hard. I don't know, but we have to assume he does. That's the only way we stay prepared. The thought haunted me more than sleep deprivation. We were living our lives under a microscope, but without knowing where the lens was pointed. I started recording our walks, marking distances, noting every tree, every bench, every angle where a photo could be taken. The paranoia was exhausting, but it also gave a strange sense of control. And then came the recurring dreams. I'd wake at 3 a.m., seeing a red hoodie standing in the tree line, hands at the pockets, hood drawn low. I'd run through corridors of Maplecrest in my mind, retracing our Sunday movements, trying to catch the moment we'd missed. Marina avoided mirrors. She didn't want to see herself in case someone else had seen her first. Every reflection, every camera lens, every glint of glass was a potential witness. I realized slowly that the danger wasn't just the man. It was the uncertainty, the inability to reclaim ordinary life. Every autumn, every empty park bench, every unoccupied jogging path became a reminder that we were never truly safe. One Friday, we drove upstate to visit Marina's parents. It was a conscious escape, a break from the shadows of Kingston. On the way, I scanned the roads obsessively, looking for the hoodie, the man, anything unusual. She noticed. "You're losing yourself in it," she said quietly. "We can't live like this forever." I didn't argue. I knew she was right. But the thought of Maplecrest, of unseen eyes, of photos we'd never find, it clung to me. We spent the weekend in relative peace, but the anxiety followed. Even surrounded by family, I couldn't shake the sense of being catalogued. Even in safety, the mind recalls danger faster than the body. Returning home, the neighborhood seemed too quiet. The wind carried the wrong kind of silence. I felt like we were stepping onto a stage we didn't audition for, performing in a scene designed to unsettle us. Marina suggested therapy. I agreed. Talking about it helped, but it didn't erase the vigilance. The man in red hadn't broken laws, hadn't been caught, hadn't been named, and that uncertainty was more invasive than any confrontation could have been. We began taking walks during daylight only. We limited our time in the parks. I installed lights in every corner of the yard. We were alive, but our lives had contracted. The world outside felt larger, stranger, and more dangerous than we had imagined. Winter arrived early, stripping trees bare, exposing the landscape and any potential watchers. Our vigilance became routine. I sometimes wondered if he had moved on, if his attention had shifted elsewhere. But the thought never brought comfort. Marina began photographing again, cautiously indoors. I stayed near her, watching angles, checking reflections, making sure each click was safe. We learned the balance between living and hiding, between observation and obsession. I realized something. The terror was never just him. It was the uncertainty, the intrusion of someone else's control into our private world. The lesson became clear. Safety is not guaranteed, but awareness is the closest we get. Trust has to be measured, vigilance must be constant, and instincts can't be ignored. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I imagine him in the tree line at Maple Crest, hooded and patient, cataloging lives he'll never touch. And I understand the power of observation, the necessity of boundaries, and the fragility of comfort. We can't control everything, but we can control what we see, what we protect, and what we refuse to surrender. The true danger in life often lies not in immediate threats, but in the uncertainty and the unknown. Awareness, vigilance, and proactive caution are essential to preserving personal safety. While fear can be paralyzing, understanding potential risks and respecting instincts allows us to navigate the world without surrendering our lives to unseen forces. Life is safer when preparation meets observation, and the unknown loses its power when met with deliberate attention. My name is Melissa Carr, and I'm 26 years old. Before I tell you about the man who followed me for 3 weeks straight, you need to understand why I was so determined to study alone at that coffee shop in the first place. I'm a nursing student at community college in Portland, Maine, finishing up my final year before getting my registered nurse certification. It's been a long road getting here. I dropped out of high school at 17 after my mom died from cancer, spent years working dead-end retail jobs, and finally decided at 23 that I needed to do something meaningful with my life. Nursing felt right. My mom had incredible nurses during her treatment, women who held her hand during chemo and talked to her like a person instead of a patient. I wanted to be that for someone else. The problem was my living situation. I shared a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with 3 roommates, all college students, and the place was never quiet. There was always someone cooking, watching television, or having loud phone conversations. I tried studying in my bedroom, but the walls were paper thin. I tried the college library, but it closed at 8 during weekdays, and I worked evening shifts at a grocery store 3 nights a week. By the time I got off work and made it to campus, the library was already locked. That's how I discovered The Grind, a small independent coffee shop tucked into a strip mall about 10 minutes from my apartment. It stayed open until 11 on weeknights, had decent Wi-Fi, and served strong coffee for reasonable prices. The place was usually quiet after 9, just a few other students scattered at tables with their laptops. It felt safe and calm, exactly what I needed. I started going there in early October, always choosing the same corner seat beside the large front window. I liked being able to see outside, to watch cars coming and going in the parking lot. I would order a large latte, spread out my nursing textbooks, and lose myself in studying. For the first few weeks, it became my routine. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights after my shift ended, I would drive straight to The Grind and study until they closed. It was the most productive I had been all semester. Then I noticed him. It was a Wednesday, in late October, probably around 9:30. I had been deep in my notes about cardiac medications when I glanced up and saw a dark sedan parked in the lot, engine running, headlights dimmed. A man sat alone in the driver's seat. At first I didn't think much of it. People parked in coffee shop lots all the time. But something made me look again a few minutes later. He was still there, same position. His face was turned toward the window, toward me. I told myself I was being paranoid. He was probably waiting for someone inside. I went back to my notes, but I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept drifting to the window. 20 minutes passed, 30. He never moved, never got out of the car, never looked at his phone. Just sat there with the engine idling and his face pointed at the window where I sat. When I finally packed up to leave that night, the car was gone. I felt relieved and a little foolish. But the next time I came to The Grind on Friday night, he was back. Same dark sedan, same parking spot, same position behind the wheel. This time I paid closer attention. The car was a Honda Accord, maybe 10 years old, dark blue or black. The man looked to be in his 30s or 40s with short hair and a heavy build. He wore what looked like a dark jacket or hoodie. My stomach tightened with unease, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he lived nearby and this was just where he liked to park and relax. Maybe it was coincidence. I turned my chair slightly so my back wasn't completely to the window and kept studying. But my hands shook when I turned the pages, and I realized I was checking the reflection in the window more than I was actually reading my textbook. An hour passed. He never got out, never turned off the engine, never looked away. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up quickly and walked out to my car with my keys gripped between my fingers. The sedan's engine was still running when I drove past it. I watched in my rearview mirror, half expecting him to follow. He didn't. The car stayed in the parking lot, exhaust visible in the cold October air. The third time it happened, on the following Monday, I knew it wasn't coincidence. He was there when I arrived, already parked, already watching. My heart started pounding. I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes debating whether to go inside at all. But I had a pharmacology exam in 2 days and I desperately needed to study. So I went inside, chose my usual seat, and tried to ignore the car parked 50 feet away. That night, something changed. Around 10 o'clock, his car door opened slightly. Just a crack, but enough for the interior light to come on. I could see him clearly for the first time. He was older than I initially thought, maybe mid-40s, with a round face and thinning hair. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking directly at me, his eyes locked on the window. Our eyes met for just a second before I jerked my head down, my heart hammering. I left early that night, gathering my things with shaking hands. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed the sedan pulling out too, slowly, maintaining distance. My chest tightened with real fear. I was being followed. This wasn't paranoia. This was happening. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I took random turns, watching my rearview mirror. The sedan followed every turn, keeping back. I couldn't lead him to my apartment. I spotted a gas station ahead, bright lights and several cars at the pumps. I pulled in quickly and parked right under the lights near the entrance where the security cameras were visible. The sedan drove past slowly. The driver's face turned toward me. Then he was gone. I sat at that gas station for 40 minutes before I felt safe enough to drive home, taking a completely different route and checking my mirrors obsessively. The next night I changed my routine. I still went to the grind but chose a different seat far from the window, tucked into a back corner where I couldn't be seen from the parking lot. I thought maybe if he couldn't see me he would lose interest. But when I arrived, his car was already there. And this time, it was parked facing the back exit door instead of the front window. He had adjusted. He had anticipated that I might try to hide. That realization sent ice through my veins. He was planning. He was thinking ahead. I walked up to the counter where a young barista named Dylan was working. "Have you noticed that car out there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "The dark sedan that's been parking here?" Dylan glanced out and shrugged. "People park here all the time. Why?" I hesitated. "The guy inside never comes in, he just sits there for hours." Dylan frowned. "You okay? Is this guy bothering you?" I wanted to say yes, that I was terrified. But the man hadn't actually done anything. He was just sitting in his car in a public parking lot. I forced a smile. "I'm fine. It's probably nothing." That Friday night, Dylan and another staff member named Rosa walked me to my car when I left. They flanked me on either side, clearly there as protection. The sedan was still in the parking lot, the man visible behind the wheel. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I could see his breath fogging the windshield. Dylan stared back at him, making it clear he was being observed. But then something happened that made everything worse. A second car pulled into the lot, a white pickup truck, and parked directly next to the sedan. Both windows rolled down, and the two men inside exchanged something. The transaction lasted only seconds before both windows went back up. The pickup drove away immediately. That's when I understood. He was coordinating with someone else. They were planning something together. I stopped going to the grind after that night. I transferred my study routine to the college library during lunch breaks, even though it meant less sleep and falling behind on work. I changed my habits completely, parking in different areas, taking different routes home, never establishing a predictable pattern. For 2 weeks, I felt like I was living in hiding, constantly looking over my shoulder. Then one night I stayed at the college library past closing working on a care plan. By the time I finished, it was almost midnight. The campus was empty. I walked out into the cold November air, keys in hand. That's when I saw it. The dark sedan, parked across the road from the library entrance, headlights off, engine quiet, but unmistakably occupied. A silhouette sat behind the wheel, unmoving, watching. My legs nearly gave out. He had found me. Despite everything I had done to change my routine, to hide, to stay unpredictable, he had found me. This wasn't about the coffee shop. It had never been about the coffee shop. He was following me specifically. He knew my car, he knew my schedule, and now I understood with horrible clarity that this man was not going to stop. I ran back inside and found a security guard named Jerome. My words came out in a panicked rush. Jerome took it seriously immediately. He walked outside with me, but by the time we got close, the car was empty. The engine was cold. The man was gone. Jerome filed a report and escorted me to my car, but we both knew the man could be anywhere now, watching, waiting. I filed a police report the next day. The officer was kind but realistic. Unless the man made direct contact or violated a specific law, there wasn't much they could do. Following someone in public spaces wasn't technically illegal. He advised me to document everything and trust my instincts. I haven't seen the sedan in 3 weeks now, but I'm still afraid every single day. I don't study at coffee shops anymore. I don't stay late anywhere alone. I obsessively check my surroundings and never walk anywhere without my phone ready to call for help. My roommates think I'm paranoid. But they didn't see his face. They didn't watch him adjust his pattern when I tried to hide. They don't understand that somewhere out there is a man who decided I was worth watching, worth following, worth whatever he was planning. And I'll never know if he gave up or if he's just waiting. More patient now, biding his time until I let my guard down. If someone's behavior makes you uncomfortable, trust that instinct immediately and take action. Don't downplay your fear or convince yourself you're overreacting. Document everything, tell people what's happening, involve authorities early, and never prioritize convenience over your safety. Predators rely on their victims' hesitation and self-doubt. Your intuition exists to protect you, so listen to it without question or shame. I was 19 years old when I learned that kindness could be a predator's disguise. My name is Sophia Wren, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the most dangerous threats don't announce themselves with violence or aggression. They slip in quietly, wearing a smile and carrying a coffee cup. Growing up, I was the kind of kid who believed the best in people. My parents raised me in a small suburban neighborhood where everyone waved from their porches and neighbors borrowed sugar from each other. My mom always said that the world was full of good people and that I should be friendly and trusting. She meant well. She wanted to raise a confident daughter who could navigate the world without fear. But she didn't prepare me for the subtle ways that someone could exploit that trust. When I turned 19, I got my first job at Grind Brew, a coffee shop downtown. My parents were proud. I was proud. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked part-time while attending community college, studying business management. The job was easy enough, grinding beans, steaming milk, making small talk with regulars. I wore the standard brown apron with the shop logo, pulled my dark hair back in a ponytail, and smiled at everyone who came through the door. The shop had a core group of regulars who came in every morning. There was Mrs. Chen, who always ordered a cappuccino and read the newspaper at table 3. There was James, a college student who seemed to camp out with his laptop for hours. And then there was him. I didn't notice him at first. He was just another face in the morning rush. Mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, button-up shirts even on casual days. He had this quality about him that seemed trustworthy. The kind of guy who looked like he could be someone's dad. He started coming in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Within a week, he was there 5 days a week. "I'll have the usual," he'd say, and I'd make him a medium black coffee. He always tipped $5 on a $6 order. In a job where most people tipped $1 or nothing at all, his generosity stood out. My coworkers and I joked about it. "That guy loves you, Sophia," my friend Marcus teased, and I'd roll my eyes and laugh it off. But then something shifted. It started small. He began asking me questions. Where did I go to school? What was I studying? Did I have siblings? I answered casually at first, thinking it was just polite conversation. People asked questions. That's what you did with regulars. You built rapport, you made them feel seen. Except this felt different. His questions became more specific. What time did I work until? Did I drive to work or take the bus? Did I live nearby? I gave vague answers. Oh, around 5 most days and not too far from here. And tried to keep my tone light. But I started noticing that he would glance at the schedule posted by the register, memorizing my hours. Then he started timing his visits perfectly. He'd come in at exactly the moments when I was working, never when my coworkers were alone on the register. He'd position himself at a small table that faced directly toward me, nursing a second drink that he'd never finish. I'd watch the coffee grow cold in his cup while his eyes remained warm, attentive, fixed on me. One Tuesday morning, he came in with a small box wrapped in silver paper. My stomach dropped before I even understood why. "I saw this and thought of you," he said, sliding it across the counter with that same practiced smile. It was a charm bracelet, delicate and expensive looking, with a small coffee cup charm hanging from it. I didn't know what to say. My mind raced through the social rules I was supposed to follow. It would be rude to refuse, but accepting it felt wrong. I held it awkwardly, the weight of it strange in my palm. "That's really nice," I heard myself say. "But I can't accept this. We barely know each other." He waved his hand dismissively. "Consider it a thank you for always being so friendly. You make my mornings better. I wanted you to know that." The statement was simple enough, but the weight of his gaze made my skin prickle. He looked at me like he was looking through me, like he was seeing something in his mind that I wasn't showing him. I put the bracelet in my apron pocket and tried to move on to the next customer. But he stayed. He always stayed. That night, I didn't wear the bracelet. I left it in a drawer in my apartment. But I couldn't shake the feeling of it, the gift itself, the assumption behind it. Why would a stranger buy gifts for a barista? What did he expect in return? My anxiety manifested in strange ways. I stopped wearing makeup to work, thinking maybe if I looked less polished, less like someone worth his attention, he'd lose interest. Instead, the next time he came in, he leaned over the counter and said, "You look tired. You should let me take care of you. I could help with things you need." The implication was suffocating. I started finding reasons to disappear into the back room. I'd suddenly remember that the pastries needed restocking or the espresso machine needed cleaning. Anything to put distance between us and his watchful eyes. My coworkers noticed. Marcus asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, just busy. I didn't know how to explain that someone was stalking me without sounding paranoid or ungrateful. Because he had done nothing technically wrong. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't made any explicit threats. He'd been nothing but polite and generous. But his politeness felt like a cage, and his generosity felt like a down payment on something I had never agreed to give. Then he started waiting outside. I noticed it one Thursday evening when I was closing with Marcus. My shift ended at 5 and he was always gone by then. But that night as I walked toward the parking lot, I saw him standing near the edge of the property, holding a coffee cup like a shield. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "Thought you might like a ride," he said, blocking my path slightly. "I'm heading that direction anyway." My heart hammered. "No, thanks. I have a ride coming." I lied. I got in my car and sat there shaking, watching him in my rearview mirror as he stood in the parking lot, completely unbothered by my rejection. The next day, I started carpooling with Marcus. We'd walk out together, make plans to grab food, anything to avoid being alone. And that's when his behavior changed. He became colder, less chatty. The warmth in his smile turned brittle. But he was still there, every day, watching with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You don't need to worry about other people picking you up," he said one morning, his voice casual but his eyes hard. "I could do that. I could take care of you." I fabricated a brother who was coming to pick me up. "My brother usually drives me," I said. "He's pretty protective." The next day he mentioned it, casually, like he was just making conversation. "Your brother that came by yesterday? I saw you walk out with him. He doesn't look like you at all. Funny thing about that." My blood went cold. He had been watching the parking lot. He had been tracking my movements so closely that he'd noticed a detail that didn't fit with my lie. He knew I was lying, and that knowledge was weaponized in his casual observation. I realized then that this wasn't just about attention or kindness or a lonely middle-aged man. This was something darker. This was someone who was building a profile of me, who was gathering information, who was testing my boundaries to see how far he could push before I'd break. One evening, about 3 weeks into this nightmare, my coworker texted that she was running late. I was closing with just the manager on duty, and he was in the back doing inventory. I stalled. I reorganized the syrup bottles for the 100th time. I wiped down the espresso machine with meticulous care. I did anything to delay walking outside. But finally, there was nothing left to do. I stepped out into the parking lot, keys gripped between my knuckles, and there he was, patient, silent, staring at me like I was a piece of property that belonged to him. That was the moment everything crystallized. In his eyes, I was no longer Sophia, the barista who made his coffee. I was a possession, an acquisition, something he had marked as his own simply through the force of his attention and persistence. I walked directly to my car without acknowledging him. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I made a decision. The next morning I called my manager. I told her everything. The questions, the gifts, the waiting outside, the watching. She listened carefully, and then she said the words I needed to hear. "That's not okay. His behavior is predatory even if it hasn't escalated to anything physical. We're going to talk to him today. He's not welcome here anymore." When he came in that afternoon, my manager pulled him aside. I didn't hear the entire conversation, but I watched from the back as his face shifted from confusion to anger to something worse. A cold, emotionless blankness. He didn't come back. But the lesson stayed with me. I learned that danger doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always come with aggression or threats. Sometimes it comes with a smile and expensive gifts and questions about your day. Sometimes it comes from someone who is just kind enough to seem trustworthy, but determined enough to ignore every boundary you set. What I understand now, years later, is that my instinct to be polite, to not offend, to give him the benefit of the doubt, those instincts were being used against me. There's a difference between kindness and boundary erosion. There's a difference between friendly conversation and strategic information gathering. I also learned that speaking up isn't rude. It's necessary. The discomfort of telling someone to stop is infinitely smaller than the danger of allowing them to continue. Your boundaries are not negotiable, and protecting yourself is not unkind. When someone makes you uncomfortable, trust that feeling. When someone pushes past your limits, speak up immediately. And remember that the people who matter will respect your boundaries. The people who don't respect them are showing you exactly who they are. Believe them. Your safety is more important than anyone's feelings, including someone who smiles and brings you gifts. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd have to think about being watched. My name is Ethan Doyle, and I'm a 22-year-old junior at State studying business administration. I've never been the type to invite attention. I prefer libraries to parties, coffee shops to bars, and the hum of people around me without actually having to engage with them. Maybe that makes me sound like a loner, but it's just who I am. I've always been quiet, the kind of person who listens more than he talks, observes rather than participates. My friends from high school used to tease me about it, but I never minded. I'd rather understand people from a distance than pretend to be someone I'm not. The coffee shop I started going to was called The Daily Grind, just off campus on Maple Street. It had wooden beams on the ceiling, mismatched furniture that looked intentionally vintage, and this perfect kind of quiet that made you feel like you were in a library that just happened to serve espresso. I'd discovered it during my sophomore year when the campus library became too crowded during midterms, and I'd been going there regularly ever since. The staff knew my order. The corner table by the window was rarely taken before 2 in the afternoon. For the first month of fall semester, life was exactly as I liked it. Organized, predictable, safe. That's when Laura walked in. I remember the first time I noticed her because she ordered the same drink I did, which seemed like a funny coincidence. She was petite, with curly dark hair and this bright, open expression that made her stand out among the studious crowd hunched over laptops. She was from my business ethics program, I realized, though we'd never spoken. When she spotted me at my usual table, she lit up like we were old friends and headed straight toward me. "Hey, you're from Professor Mitchell's class, right?" she said, pulling out the chair across from me without asking. "I'm Laura. I always see you here. Mind if I grab this seat? The Wi-Fi is way better over here." I didn't mind. She was friendly in an easy way that didn't require much effort on my part. We studied in companionable silence that first afternoon, and when she left, she smiled and said, "Same time tomorrow?" I shrugged, non-committal, but meaning yes. At first, it was nice having someone to study with. She'd show up with coffee already in hand, ready to work. We'd compare notes from class, quiz each other on concepts, and occasionally grab lunch together. She had this way of making everything feel effortless, like she wasn't trying to be my friend so much as she simply already was. My mom, who worries about me being too isolated, was thrilled when I mentioned I'd made a study buddy. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she said over the phone. "You need to get out more, meet people." But somewhere between the second week and the third, something shifted. I started noticing that Laura's schedule seemed to sync perfectly with mine. I'd arrive at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday and she'd already be there, coffee steaming like she'd been waiting specifically for me. When I went to the cafe on a different day to break up the routine, she was there. When I tried sitting at a different table to get some space, within 10 minutes she'd relocated her things next to me, not asking, just settling in like it was the plan all along. At first I told myself I was being paranoid. People have routines, coffee shops are convenient. It was probably just coincidence. But then came the small moments that made my skin prickle. She'd lean in close when pointing at my notes, her arm brushing mine. She'd laugh at things I said that weren't jokes, watching my face carefully like she was studying me. She'd mention details about my day that I hadn't told her, like when I said I was thinking about going to the gym. She'd suddenly appear the next afternoon saying, "I figured you'd be here instead of at the gym today, good choice. You work better when you're here with me anyway." The way she said it wasn't flirty, it was possessive. One afternoon in late September, I arrived to find her already at our table with a drink waiting. Iced vanilla latte with 2 pumps of caramel. My exact order. "I ordered for you," she said proudly. "I know what you like now." That's when my stomach twisted. I hadn't told her my order. Not specifically. She'd simply watched me order it enough times to memorize it. The realization that she'd been tracking my movements, cataloging my preferences like data, made me deeply uncomfortable. "Thanks," I said quietly, sitting down. "But you don't have to do that." "I like doing things for you," she replied, smiling. "We're a good team, you and me." I pretended to focus on my laptop. The cursor blinked uselessly on a half-written essay I couldn't concentrate on. It escalated from there in ways that were hard to pinpoint because they were never violent or even openly threatening. That's what made it terrifying. There was no moment I could point to and say, "That's where she crossed the line." It was more like watching the line move gradually until I realized I'd been standing on the wrong side of it for weeks. She started speaking in future tense about us. "When we have our place after graduation," she'd say, or "We should travel together next summer." I'd correct her gently, clarifying that we were study partners, friends maybe, but she'd just smile like I was being modest. She referred to the table where we sat as ours, and once, when another girl sat near me while Laura was in the bathroom, she'd come back and said quietly, "She was watching you, I think. I don't like her type." I hadn't mentioned anyone sitting nearby. I'd been so focused on my work I hadn't even noticed. The day she texted me out of the blue, "Hey, you're late today. Everything okay?" I felt the last piece of my comfort collapse. I'd never given her my number. When I asked how she got it, she explained casually, "The cafe has that sign-in sheet for the Wi-Fi network. Your number was right there. I figured it'd be easier to reach you directly sometimes." She'd gone through a sign-in sheet to get my personal phone number. The casual way she said it, like she'd simply borrowed a pencil, made my skin crawl. I started avoiding the coffee shop. I'd go at different times, sit at different locations on campus, anything to break the pattern. But within days, she'd find me. She always found me. It was like I'd become a puzzle she'd already solved, and she was just enjoying watching me try to hide. The fear wasn't the kind you see in movies. There were no threats, no aggressive confrontations. It was the subtle realization that someone had decided I belonged to them, had begun arranging my life around that assumption, and seemed completely immune to my discomfort. She didn't need to threaten me. The threat was already there in her certainty, in her absolute conviction that I was hers to keep track of, to plan for, to possess. One evening, I finally worked up the courage to talk to her directly. I found her at the cafe as usual, and sat across from her with my heart pounding. "Laura, I think we need to set some boundaries," I said carefully. "You're a nice person, but I need more space. I can't have you texting me about my schedule or following me around." She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her expression flicker through something that looked like hurt, then something harder. "You don't mean that," she said. "We're good together. You just need time to realize it." "No," I said firmly. "I do mean it. I want you to stop." She stood up slowly, still smiling that same smile. "You'll come around. You always do." That's when I knew that nothing I said would change how she saw me, because she wasn't really seeing me at all. She'd created a version of me, a version that belonged to her, and I could never convince her otherwise. I finally told my RA what was happening. She advised me to go to campus security. I filed a report. Laura was eventually told to maintain distance from me. She did, outwardly. But sometimes I'd catch her watching me from across the library, that same certain smile on her face. I learned something important through all of this. I learned that predatory behavior doesn't always look like what we expect. It doesn't always come with anger or threats. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's wrapped in friendship and familiarity and the kind of attention that flatters until you realize you're being trapped. I also learned that staying silent, trying not to make waves, trying to be polite in the face of someone else's obsession, only encourages them further. I learned that setting boundaries isn't rude. It's necessary. It's the only real defense against someone who's decided your life should be theirs. We must respect the autonomy and personal space of others, and we must never assume that someone's affection for us gives us the right to track, control, or manipulate them. Obsession dressed up as care is still obsession. And if someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them.